Let's say you're in a small tribe in the early human era. You have 16 fellow humans and some basic resources. Sure, you may have some internal squabbles, but you know everyone within the tribe. Everyone serves a purpose, and everyone more or less has their place within the group. The world you find yourself in is harsh, and sustained life requires constant work and maintenance. Without access to proper food, water, and shelter, an individual dies, and thus their value to the group is lost. To face the uncertain future, the tribe must grow. And to do that, the group must thrive and procreate. Children take years of selfless sacrifice and care before they are ready to take care of themselves, let alone contribute to the collective. And yet groups that fail to provide that care will eventually die out. It is insufficient to simply have each individual look after themselves, for this is no group at all. To be a successful tribe, one must be willing to look after each other's needs. While there may be a lot of redundancy in the work required by members, the differences between each person give rise to clear strengths and weaknesses. From these differences, classes of people begin to self-organize. Many such groups divide labor between physically strong males and child-rearing females, as well as between children, teenagers, and adults. There is no higher order or prescribed system that they were born into. It is merely a result of everything needing to get done. You still see such emergent organizations present in extended family households. Again, this is not because it is instructed, but rather because it is necessary for success. Groups that fail to organize and specialize fail to remain a group for long. And your tribe just so happened to successfully develop a relatively harmonious and stable order for yourselves. Occasionally, you would encounter other tribes. Some you would get to know and even become friendly with. Often, both you and they had something in surplus that the other is low on, and thus trade between the groups becomes obvious and highly valuable to both parties. This mutually beneficial trade strengthens the groups, and over time, members of the tribe are traded as spouses, bringing the two ever closer. However, not every encounter was friendly. Thankfully, due to a combination of superior scouts, warriors, and allies, your tribe managed to be victorious in most encounters. From these victories came new rewards to further strengthen your own group, via the taking of resources of the vanquished as plunder and slaves. Additionally, animals are domesticated and brought into the group for labor and protection. Those who are not seen as equal, but rather as a resource for the collective, are integrated into the tribe, and with this, your tribe's survivability and productivity skyrocket as a dedicated workforce is established. Over time, your tribe grows, as does your network of contacts and shared history. You develop stories and explanations for who you are and why things are the way that they are. Your entire tribe collectively finds itself a place within the wider world. And the identity of individual tribesmen becomes overshadowed by the identity of the tribe itself. The tribe functions as an individual member among a collection of tribes and other groups within the area, and from this, new specializations and stereotypes emerge on a tribal level. As individual strengths and weaknesses aggregate into the reputation and specialization of the collective, so too the niche that your tribe has found for itself shapes its members, adjusting their priorities and values through conformity to the higher order expectations. The truths about the higher order tribe you belong to are reflected among the members, as the members' qualities are reflected upon the entire tribe. As above, so below. Systems are built on top of systems. As an atom forms a molecule, which forms bricks, which form a wall, which forms a building, which builds a city. Likewise, other atoms make up proteins, which make up cells organized into organs as part of a person, who is part of a community, city, nation, and species. Wherever we look, we see that the things that we understand as cohesive individuals are actually composed of many smaller, much simpler parts. While the modern world gives us access to information and history on a scale capable of examining this truth more clearly, its understanding echoes back into antiquity. In the Emerald Tablet of Hermes, it is said, "That which is above is like that which is below, and that which is below is like to that which is above." This is the core component of the universal solvent, the philosopher's stone of alchemy. A truth so foundational that it impacts everything at every level. Everything that exists is composed of systems built on top of systems, and thus the property of systems themselves are the laws by which everything functions. There is no escape from this truth because it is the very way in which truth can be. At sufficient complexity, lower order systems give rise to higher order metasystems. There is a concept called Dunbar's number. It posits that a human being can only maintain between 100 to 250 stable relationships. As you pass across the 150 mark, the structure of the organization necessarily shifts towards a legalized, rule-based bureaucracy rather than a stable social group. While this is the complexity threshold of human social networks, different systems will have different thresholds for metasystem emergence. Regardless, any sufficiently complex system will give rise to a metasystem that will consequently shape and control its lower-order systems. As numbers scale, new properties emerge. A house has an inside and an outside, potentially has occupants, and has an aesthetic. These are properties that the components that make up the house, the walls, and the bricks, do not have. The cells of your body generally don't get considered with individual names, but your organs can, and most certainly people do. To go back to the tribal example, individuals occupy positions within the group that are not inherent to themselves without the group to give them context. A leader, a cook, or a shaman are properties that exist on a tribal level and only emerge as the individual becomes part of a collective. The tribal structure gains properties that no individual has internally on their own level. While it is true that an individual may exclusively fill the role of leader of the group, the fact that there is a leader, and who it happens to be, is a property of the group, not the individual. Rather, it is bestowed upon the member by a function of the group. It is a mantle that is applied to the individual, offering them new expectations and, with it, powers granted to the individual by the group to wield the collective power of the group. The cook decides what is for dinner, and the shaman offers guidance and opinions thought to be special. These mantles are conferred by the group upon the individual to establish specialization and thus authority within their domain. Not all mantles are exclusive. In fact, the identity as a member of the tribe itself is a kind of mantle that both empowers and defines an individual. Every brick in the wall, every link in the chain, is both interchangeable and essential to the existence of the whole. Because the role is filled by individuals, the nature and quality of the individuals echo into their emergent properties. If the population of the tribe has a deficit of good leaders or can't recognize good leadership among the population, then the quality of the leadership of the collective will be lower than that of a collective that may be different on an individual level. Of course, this will have profound consequences on the group that then has to rely on that leadership. The population likely remains completely unaware of their own failings in discernment and how they have impacted the group's success and the individual's comfort. The Dunning-Kruger effect suggests that the skills required to successfully navigate such challenges are also the skills necessary to recognize the good application of those very skills. The absence of discernment renders you incapable of accepting the source of your own failure. To amplify this, if the leadership is simply self-serving and not totally destructive for the collective, it will be driven to preserve its own power and cover up for its own failures. The ignorance of those who empower them becomes a necessary component to the overall system, and thus it is preserved and reinforced by the meta-system itself. Therefore, emergent properties are rightfully considered magnifications of the properties of the lower level. If the bricks are strong, the wall is strong. However, given that we are talking about emergent properties manifesting on a collective level, there are often unintuitive results at scale. While it may only take a dozen or so to make a tribe, it takes millions of cells to make up a person. This complexity means that what may seem essential on a lower level may be indistinguishable at a higher level. And at the same time, small deviations may give rise to profoundly different results when scaled up. Or to put this more simply, properties are emergent, but principles reflect throughout the layers. There are properties of a sufficient number of atoms and proteins bundled together into a cell that are seemingly independent of, and yet directly related to, the laws of physics that govern those more basic systems. The principles that govern the lower systems manifest on higher levels in abstract form. Likewise, higher order systems are influenced by lower level truths that both seem unintuitive and yet practical if understood. The larger the set, the more unusual the emergent properties that we find compared to the lower system. The most notable example of this is human consciousness. Human consciousness is not born from any given piece. There is no thinking unit of the brain. There are no smart neurons. If you zoom in enough to the brain, you see clusters of synapses firing based on stimuli, not making decisions on their own, but merely functioning on a mechanical level. Where then does consciousness come from? Not just consciousness, but any capacity to think whatsoever. Why is it that neurons acting in a fundamentally mechanical way can result in emotions, tastes, and desires? An individual ant is not intelligent. No grand poobah of the colony gets asked what should be done. The individual ants do not make decisions as you would normally think of it, but rather respond to a series of signals both from the environment around them and from pheromones and signals being put out by equally mechanical, stupid pieces of the colony. However, the anthill itself demonstrates intelligence. Together, they can communicate with other anthills. They can plan, negotiate, and go to war. Together, the collective operates as one entity, even as each ant is more or less mechanical. Individuals make up the whole, and traits propagate. So what then is really going on here? For that, we need to talk about fireflies and synchronicity. In Thailand, there's a curious type of firefly named the Theoptrix macale that inhabits the trees and flashes with one another. Not at one another, mind you, but with. Entire groves of trees have been filmed filled with these fireflies, all flashing with Christmas lights style precision. Not one individual firefly controls the overall system. However, each contributes by adjusting its behavior based on the flashing of all other fireflies around it. Each firefly has a built-in cooldown or period it prefers to wait between flashes. Every time an individual firefly sees a nearby flash, it reduces its own internal cooldown by a small amount for that iteration. Due to this minor compensation baked into their behavior, the entire cluster quickly begins to act in unison. However, as may be expected, one can trick the system. As the fireflies themselves are quite a wonder, they are great for Thailand's tourism industry. This leads to tourists coming and taking pictures of the fireflies and the groves that they inhabit. Interestingly, the camera flashes have a noticeable effect on the fireflies. They are unable to distinguish their own internal flashings from that of the camera. But at the same time, since they receive the signal as a group, they thus react to it as one. Those close to the flash are impacted first, but as they adjust to the stimuli, their change in signal is propagated throughout the entire collective, encoding the input into their future output. What is happening here happens throughout nature, regardless of level of intelligence supposedly involved. If you place a set of metronomes on a board so that they can freely rock back and forth and set them into motion at random times, they will quickly sync up with one another and strike as one. As each swing of the pendulum provides a bit of force to the platform on which they all rest, it subtly influences the others. Likewise, the entire solar system rests along a rough plane not because it randomly ended up that way, but rather because each small bit pulls against each other small bit. Random variances give way to clusters, and each cluster pulls in more and more to itself. Clumps too close collide with each other, forming planets and stars. Even those that are so far away as to avoid collision still influence each other, but in more subtle ways. Every object above the plane would be pulling down, and everything below the plane would be pulling up. Obviously, the exact nature of the plane was not predetermined by anything more than initial conditions, but on a long enough timeline, such a plane will emerge. A kind of order naturally comes from the earlier, more chaotic state. What can be seen as divine order, in fact, comes from simple laws of physics playing out over unfathomable time. In its most abstract form, what we have here is a series of examples of self-interactive systems. In each of these examples, we have a system with properties: the flashing lights of the fireflies, the physics of the swinging metronomes, and the gravitational forces of planetary bodies that are all interacting with each other in sufficient numbers that small patterns emerge that snowball into increasingly stable synchronized metasystems. All it takes is enough time or iterations and a critical mass to stabilize the system. Additionally, since these metasystems are stabilized by constituent elements interacting with one another, similar inputs from the outside of the metasystem impact and can be propagated throughout the grouping. How it does so is dependent on the cohesion of the group as well as the kind and scale of the input into the system. Tapping on the side of the metronome's table will change them all by a degree matched by the force of your tap against the number of pendulums involved. What this means is that, like the camera with the fireflies, your tap is encoded into the timing of each metronome from that point forward. So, what happens when a system, synchronized internally to itself, encounters another such system? They both interact with each other and themselves based on the forces and nature of both interacting bodies. Often this can cause chaos, much like the chaos of your average field of fireflies. But occasionally, the interactions will be in some way compatible with one another. A new, stable, even more meta system emerges. As above, so below, as within, so without. So, given all of this, what does an anthill, or a human mind for that matter, think? Are you truly a cohesive person? Or rather, what emerges when your drives and desires interact with one another? How many of your thoughts are truly your own? Your hunger. What are you hungry for? Boredom. Why can't you find satisfaction? Your intrusive thoughts about a previous event. Why do we find ourselves so often out of our own control? In reality, under the surface, are electrical impulses being sent out, received, and propagated throughout the brain. These trillions of neuron firings make up clusters and pathways. It stores memories and, more importantly, lessons. From this, a personality grows. Events turn into memories and are encoded as fears, goals, and ideals. The human mind, however complex it is, cannot have every pathway active at any given time. Things slip the mind. They don't come up. You don't recognize a pattern and thus log them mentally as separate. Conflicts emerge between these fragments of self. Do you push past your fear for the sake of your goals? Or do they get in the way of what you want? Are your ideals worth selling out over? While these examples are pretty extreme, they occur constantly on smaller scales. Compared and contrasted, they interact with one another, and the result of that interaction emerges as what you think of as yourself. This may seem like a terrifying notion. However, I think that there is value in this perspective. We can learn a deeper understanding of who we are both as individuals and as a population. We are built up of smaller systems and take part in larger systems, both of which influence us in ways that we do not necessarily understand. Breaking through this helps us understand how power works, how we can potentially wield it, or, at the very least, hopefully insulate ourselves from others' influence, which may not be in our best interest. As we have seen, specialization is key to improving the success of the whole. But this often comes at the expense of that which is being specialized. It is fine enough for a person to seek a calling within the society they find themselves in. It is another matter entirely when those purposes are forced upon them. So far, I have presented a rather rosy view of progress, even going so far as to skip gingerly over the concept of slavery. Some may have bristled at this, and rightfully so, for it is a necessary component to understanding this whole process. However, to properly explore it, we must delve into a darkness that many are repulsed by instinctively. Hold on to that, for it is your lifeline. Concepts like good and evil can only exist within the context of a system, and these concepts dissolve in higher order systems. Those who argue for absolute morality often do so precisely so that you will not consider the consequences of their moral argument. The Abrahamic faiths argue that God alone is definitionally good. It is understood by them that God put all things into place, and the order that God has constructed is not only good, but overall perfect. Any concept of flaw is but an illusion created by having such a narrow view of the overall plan. Suffering, genocide, and slavery were all acceptable things for God to both permit and instruct, because the suffering and the failure are necessary components of the overall process, necessary to its overall goodness and perfection. This means that humankind cannot truly understand good from evil. We only intuit it on our own level. Only by trusting and following God's commandments can one hope to be good, whatever that entails, from prayer and fasting to the murder of your firstborn. The modern humanist movement disagrees, of course. They are among many in the modern day who posit an alternative definition. Goodness is that which leads to human flourishing, and evil is that which leads to suffering. Thus, morality in this framework is no longer about adhering to the code or standards of God, as it were, but rather about minimizing suffering and maximizing prosperity. While this may sound more pleasant to modern ears, it still contains within itself a human-centered perspective. It likewise lacks the tools to properly measure and balance the countervailing ideas of minimizing suffering and maximizing flourishing. A framework is dead without active discernment, and if that discernment cannot be left up to signs, omens, or other systems of divination from God, then it must be done by man. And if we cannot have faith in God, then how can we have faith in ourselves, as flawed as we are known to be? But systems can be made to be trusted. A system can be reliable. A system can be agreed upon, understood, and built upon. The practice of a system can be recorded. It can be reviewed, learned from, and iterated on. A system can be evaluated for its results, divorced from the egos and stories of the individuals who participated as elements within it. A system can hold power away from any individual through the consensus of the whole. And yet, this utopian system is still completely worthless at defining good and evil without some external context or frame of reference. Without such a frame, things just happen. Is it good or bad that a planet falls into a black hole? Does it matter? What could make it matter? We can make it matter if it matters to us. Concepts like value, worth, righteousness, and wickedness all evaporate completely in the absence of minds to produce them. We are the exclusive font of value in our universe, as far as we are concerned. But a human framework is not objective. It is subjective. Even if every human being agreed with it intuitively, which it would be foolish to say that they do, it would still not make it objectively, morally good that humans flourish. Objective morality is a lie, because for something to be good, it must be good for something. More importantly, what is good for one is often bad for another. Veganism becomes a common lifestyle for those who truly respect their place in the world, and yet they have only minimized their harm. The chickens may be spared of their torment, but the carrots were not so lucky. All that said, chucking out the very notion of objective morality does not allow us to do whatever we desire. Clear harm and poor consequences are still in store for those who do. Rather, we are even more challenged to carefully consider and forge our own morality, both as individuals and as a collective. We do not get to wave off our responsibilities to justify our positions on morality to higher powers, but rather allow our results to prove our methods. If slavery is right or wrong, it isn't because God did or didn't allow it. It is because the human species behaves best with itself when it treats all men as created equal, and that endowed within each one of us is some intrinsic, perhaps unrealized value that should not be discounted trivially. While these high-minded notions certainly feel good to espouse and to hear, they smash into the wall of practicality. Every civilization in history has stratified power between those with control and those without. While maybe someday we will be able to construct a system so refined as to be more or less autonomous from any given individual, and thus only answerable to the collective, for the time being, power has collected into the hands of a few. On a tribal level, specialization emerged due to the need for everything to get done. Some tasks were more easily batched together than others. A few talented hunters could take on the risk and hardship of the hunt, sparing the rest. This also frees up another to spend their time doing what they love, cooking, and through this passion they bring up the quality of the food that the whole tribe eats, not just their own. But who cleans the toilets? Not all jobs are as glamorous or exciting as hunting or cooking, but they are nonetheless required for the maintenance of the overall system. At first, these pesky tasks are relatively minor, annoying, but what are you going to do? Sometimes we develop egalitarian solutions for these kinds of problems. We clean up after ourselves. We take turns with the chores. But as things scale up, often these more primitive systems collapse under the weight. Eventually, you need someone to manage the more unseemly or undesired tasks on their own. But who? How do we get people to do the work that must be done so that I don't have to? And how do we justify that that is their lot in life and not mine? The sad truth is that subjugation is not just acceptable, it is a fundamental component of complex systems. Every moment of every day, we sustain ourselves by digesting the life force of other beings, while our own internal homeostasis is maintained by a biome of creatures that we utterly rely on for survival, and yet do not have any conscious direct control over. The tension between compassion and selfishness is, in fact, the tension between self-identification and collective identification. It is a matter of who you see as your brother, but the boundary is not objectively defined. It is constructed by you and by us all. It was likely installed into you through indoctrination so deep that you may not have ever really considered it. but the boundary is ultimately an arbitrary illusion enforced within the mind. Thus, to be responsible, we must take ownership of our line and answer for where we place our boundary of compassion. Make no mistake, as much of the Abrahamic religions have largely modernized, as they were given no other choice, the foundational ideas and rhetoric are still dangerously embedded within their paradigms. You may think that we are beyond things like slavery or racism, but this is only because those more abhorrent justifications embedded within their framework, if not the actual text of the faith, are suppressed by more powerful cultural forces at the moment. As we have seen in the rise of Christian nationalism in the West, if allowed to grow and become comfortable, these same arguments are championed again. The real problem here is that subjugation is useful to power, but the natural counterforce to this is that the subjugated resist. The force used to subjugate the population also serves to strengthen the bonds between the oppressed. The flaws of the system are exposed by those mistreated by it. Ultimately, the meta-system is balanced upon these counteracting forces without real regard for the individuals ground by the millstone. The systems of power that are the most successful are those that can both subjugate the largest population possible, while at the same time explaining it in such a way as to undermine and subvert the resistance to such an extent that the very systems that the resistance itself relies on is co-opted by the greater system of control. This may seem sinister to many, but again, that feeling comes from existing within the system that we are inspecting. Like the laws of physics, the property of human social systems is in essence neutral. The techniques of power that exploit our mental and social systems to the ends of those who manipulate us are neutral in the ways that knives and guns exploit the laws of physics as a tool for us to enact change, and they too are ultimately neutral. It is how the tool is used that matters. But at the same time, these tools can be crafted in such a way as to encourage certain applications or behaviors from the user. The form suggests the function. The conclusion from all of this is what the mystics have been stating since before we managed to etch our lessons into physical objects to be preserved to this day, that there are unseen forces that both shape and empower us. The understanding of these systems continues to progress, and in the same way that science has brought our physical world to kneel before us, so too does the understanding of these unseen forces allow us to engineer new and more perfected systems of power. The truths once organized into frameworks such as alchemy or astrology and magical will working have been reinterpreted as psychology and sociology. However, the most potent form of social manipulation rely on the vulnerability that comes from a subject's lack of understanding of the forces being wielded against them. This too can be used to our own advantage in ways such as the placebo effect, and to our ultimate detriment via advertising. Thus, the people and systems in power consistently apply the lessons learned from the past upon the population, while at the same time diminishing and subverting those tools and understanding from that same population. All while we continue to be drawn to the truth like moths to the flame. As with all things, there must be a balance. The challenge before the magus within all ages is that of understanding and accepting the laws of the universe as they are, while remaining grounded enough to not be dissolved completely by that knowledge. The very methods by which the majority of the population is puppeted can allow the magus better mastery of themselves and their universe. The goal of my work is to both expose the exploitation of systems of power used to twist the minds and act to work against their own best interest, while at the same time salvaging the lessons learned from faith and magic throughout history to empower the individual to maximize their capability to be good stewards of their own subsystems and participants in the larger systems intentionally to shape the systems we collectively allow to control us for the benefit of all. The goal of my work is to both expose the exploitation of the systems of power used to twist minds to act and work against their own best interest, while at the same time salvaging the lessons learned from faith and magic throughout history to empower the individuals to maximize their capability to be good stewards of their own subsystems and participate in the larger systems intentionally to shape the very systems that we collectively allow to control us for the benefit of all. I thank you for taking the time and energy to engage in this journey thus far and encourage you to continue with me as we walk the path of responsible enlightenment. And it all begins by reckoning with the self. Only then can you become a master of your own world and thus a component of a healthier, more effective civilization and species. You may not want to be king, but it helps to know when someone is making you a pawn.